Speaking of reliability, a podcast with good friends talking with you about reliability engineering topics. Welcome to Speaking of Reliability. This is Fred Schenkelberg.
And this is Kirk Gray.
And this is Nik Sharpe.
And Nik, welcome to the show. This is our 1000th episode. And Kirk and I, one of the original thoughts to mark this episode for us, being a nice 4-digit round number, was that I wanted to talk to Kirk because Kirk and I did the very first episode 1 of the series way back when. And of course we talked about HALT, but it was kind of stilted a little bit. And I think we've loosened up quite a bit in the years, but we wanted to talk to somebody that actually listens to the show. And we do get questions, we get emails and LinkedIn messages, stuff like that. And so we briefly, Nik, you and I briefly have exchanged emails over the years for all kinds of stuff. And some of them you've commented on episodes and stuff like that. So I don't want it to be an interview so much, but to get us started is, how did you run into the show and why in the world did you listen to us?
Yeah, thanks.
That might be the way to do it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Fred. How I got started listening to Speaking of Reliability, I was looking for some content whilst I was studying my master's, just to help understand some of the principles we're working through, and stumbled upon the Ascendo Reliability website, and then subscribed to the newsletter and got the weekly newsletter come through, and noticed under Reliability FM section in there was the podcast Speaking of Reliability, and the first one I saw was the history of reliability. I think it was around episode 540, and I was like, oh, I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to history of things, and dialed in and listened to the dulcet tones of Chris Jackson talk about the history of reliability for 3 episodes.
The accent you could understand, I guess.
Well, that's it. I was like, oh, bingo! I finally found another Aussie that speaks my language.
Yeah.
So how long ago was that, Nik, that you found us?
That would probably have been about 2020.
2020. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, just over the half century mark of the episodes, and yeah, from there was started. Back then I was this was just before COVID came through, so I was still traveling to the office on a daily basis, and obviously I had 530 episodes of a backlog to sort of work through, as well as the new episodes that came out each week. So I started to listen in on the commute to and from work, which I was able to get an episode or 2 in on the way to and from work. So that was a great way to both strengthen my learnings during doing the masters, but also complement the work I was doing at the time in reliability and engineering itself as well.
Did you? Okay, so I'm curious, did it make you go back and maybe look at some earlier episodes, or did you kind of follow from that point and listen? Because Fred has built up quite a stack of consultants, and I think different subjects like routine, what do you call it, reliability center maintenance and things like that. I'm not as familiar with.
Yeah, so no, 100% right. Like as I said, like I found out there was a bit of a backlog, and I started to go through some of the back catalogue and looking for some episodes that piqued interest, and then I started to potentially click on the same podcast every so often, and realized I probably should start writing some of this stuff down. So that way I didn't listen to the same podcast each commute. So yeah, luckily I did manage to actually follow that pattern. And once I finished the podcast, I'd write it down in a trusty Excel sheet. And I think from then I worked through about 120, 140 of the episodes previous to that one there, in no particular order. It's just topics that piqued my interests. So things like eradicating MTBF and
Yay.
celebrating failures and how to learn from failures and anything like that. So it was I was definitely managed to work my way through a fair bit of it. So that was always a good thing.
Great.
I'm curious, that's a lot of content, and you were doing, potentially 4 episodes a day, 3, 4, 5 days a week. And that's a lot of material. I think if we would have put it all in a textbook, it'd be a very fat one. It's not as
That's
organized or anything. Now, when we started, it was the original intent was started at a conference. The idea for the show was started at a conference, and there was a handful of us standing around in the between sessions in the hallway and chatting, and we were just talking shop. What do you do? Interesting problems, stuff like that. What are you working on? And one of the women in the group, she said, how do we keep this going? How do we have these conversations when we're not at a conference? Because it's really valuable. And I thought, well, we can do that. We can start a podcast and gathered a handful of willing people, and Kirk included. And we always enjoyed talking shop whenever we ran into each other or had the chance. So I thought, well, this is easy. We'll just record it.
Yeah, Fred. Yeah, he had how Fred and I met was in San Francisco, and he had his. We were at a accelerated stress testing and reliability conference, which really doesn't exist anymore. We did it for 12 or 13, maybe 15 years, and it kind of faded out for different reasons. But Fred had on his table with a big no MTBF sign, and I said, "There's my guy." Somebody who's standing up and opposing some very traditional reliability concepts. And one of them, of course, is still unfortunately prevalent, and that's MTBF, even though there is some back away from that, and we're all fighting that concept.
Well, there's a lot of progress on that. I don't know, Nick. So. You mentioned the show Eradicating MTBF. I think we've talked about MTBF in one form or another, probably 30 episodes. I haven't done an inventory of what what topics are each one, but I'm quite sure it's come up more than once. I don't know. Do you see it, Nick? Is MTBF in your industries? You're more in the, you talked about mining equipment and consulting with more of the manufacturers or not designing the products, but using heavy equipment and stuff like that. Is MTBF prevalent there, or is the show like our show, this show, and other efforts we're doing to eradicate it? Is that making a mark at all, or is it making a difference?
Nah, it's still a plague within the mining industry over here in Australia, at least in the eastern seaboard. Everyone is sort of reporting on MTBF this and MTBF that, and jumping up and down when they don't hit their target for MTBF that they've got as part of their KPIs. And
just roll the dice again, you get a different number.
Well, that's it. And quite often than not, their MTBF is low because they've had low operating hours and they haven't had a failure type thing. So it's like they're jumping up and down over shadows a fair bit within that instance. So. No, it's still heavily used as a reliability metric, and I start the education process every time I begin a new job, consulting or in my previous roles when I was working with different mine sites, or working for different mine sites as well. I would be starting that education to try and drive away from using that as a metric.
I mean, it's not the show is not designed, as anybody that's listened to more than one episodes know that it really is back to that conference, standing in the hallway and, hey, what's new with you? And it's, I don't know, does it come across like that, Nick? Does it come across as that we're just friends that like to talk about this stuff?
100%, mate. It's that's what keeps me coming back. It's just like a couple of friends talking shop, or a bit of scuttlebutt within the office, or anything you'd sort of water cooler chat as such. And in my current workplace where I am working from home, it definitely helps keep abreast of some of the reliability chat a bit, where that stuff doesn't typically happen, given that we don't have an office to sort of meet and talk with our fellow colleagues as such around it. So that's definitely comes across as friends talking shop.
Oh, that's cool. I'm glad to hear that. I've heard other folks talk about it too.
Nik, are you? How's the local? I guess Australia is a big country, or spread out. But how do you have organizations and meetings, groups that discuss these things and push the idea of no MTBF? Or are there any places that are where in your country that they share this kind of information? Because reliability in general is a tough field to share information about, just because of you don't want to
trade secrets and non-disclosures,
and you don't want to discourage equipment manufacturers, or say bad things about them. But I'm sure you have some feelings like you did about a certain item we just talked about, that's pretty poor reliability.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's not too much like industry events or anything like that focused on reliability engineering within Australia. There are one or two conferences that sort of have a reliability sort of side put to it. I know one of the university that I lecture at, they have a biannual conference and share it every other year with a university in India, where they sort of do talk about intelligent asset management and maintenance and reliability. But that one's sort of more focused solely, or sorry, at this stage, it's only in its fourth iteration, but it's had an academic focus rather than a industry focus, or both combined.
Yeah.
So it's sort of limited the audience is still a bit to people who are already drinking the Kool-Aid, and you're still able to share some of the stuff around. But it's in that theoretical academic space more so than the practical industry style approach. So there's definitely a market for it over here in Australia, or at least trying to set up some technical societies and things like that. But one of the hurdles that would be in place over here for that would be the working schedules and the fly out workers as well. You'd be hard to struggle to get a common time for people to meet.
Right.
Yeah.
How many time zones are across Australia?
There is 3 time zones.
We're big.
Three major time zones anyway.
Yeah.
When it comes to daylight savings, I think it spreads out to 5 or 6 time zones, but
that's confusing. Okay.
yeah, some states don't believe in daylight savings. So that's where the additional time zones pop up.
Oh,
we have the same thing, and Australia, and Arizona, and Indiana, and some other places. But we're actually talking about getting rid of the whole system of daylight. There's a lot of talk about eliminating that now.
Well, we've been talking about getting rid. We, not me. Politicians have been talking about it for longer than I've been talking about getting rid of MTBF. So it's been a long time.
We'll see. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, I was going to ask Nik, MTBF I know comes through, and it's not by design at all. And I know oftentimes when I talk to Kirk, we talk about failure analysis, HALT testing, or HALT, and using stresses to find things. When
testing the limits, right?
Testing the limits, that stuff. When I talk to Carl, it's a bit of FMEA focus, and a bit about the book that Carl and I put together on reliability management. I talked to Chris. I asked him all the hard questions of, into the math and the details of analysis and stuff like that.
Statistical or sadistical stuff, as I call it.
Yeah. Careful there, Kirk. And, I find, and we do get questions. And that's one of the, I think, for me anyway, I'm not going to speak for you, Kirk, but for me, it's when we get a question from a listener, and somebody sends us a note, and I know, Nik, you've sent us a couple over the years, and
Yeah, there's been a few episodes on some of the questions I've sent through as well, which has been great to listen to and hear your guys' thoughts.
yeah, the hard part is that when you send a question and we try to answer right away, within a day or so, because like you, Nik, working in the field and others that were listening to the shows, you got a problem you got to solve today or this week, or at least get in motion a solution for it, or understand what the next steps are, or whatever it is. And we tend to record sometimes up to 6 weeks in advance, depending on all of our schedules. And so waiting for the episode, maybe, dollar short and too late, or whatever they call it.
But we hope it will help somebody in the future. And,
Yeah. And a lot of the questions, it's like the teacher in schools, ask your question because somebody else probably has it too. But I've found that a lot of times where we can try to get the answer back to somebody, or at least some evidence or information or guidance or whatever right away. But you don't have to wait for the episode. But we tend, because it is an unformatted discussion, we tend to really expand it. And I learn stuff all the time when somebody asks a question and I think I knew the answer. And then Kirk says, "What are you thinking? You got to do this instead."
But actually, I listen to many of the other speaking of reliability podcasts when I'm driving on the road and just see what Fred and the other guys are talking about, because I do have an interest in all the field of reliability, even though I'm not, post market, which you're more of, you have to deal with the problems after the fact that the design has already been completed and shipped to the field.
It just adds a layer of complexity on it all, doesn't it, Nik?
No, that's it. And no, you're 100% right. I enjoy listening to the podcast with Kirk to learn about how I could advance my failure analysis skills. Having worked for an OEM and in their reliability department, I had a fair bit of experience tearing things apart myself and doing failure analysis on returned iron. So that was always a great sort of one. And Kirk would often talk about how to look after the electric side of things there too, which was always great because every time we'd have an electric component come through, it'd be like, oh, we don't know what to do. We'd have to go back and research a few things. So that was always a great one. I was able to go, oh yeah, I know of something there, and able to at least start from there rather than starting from scratch.
Oh, that's cool.
And yeah, the same when listening to podcasts with Carl, it'd be that would sort of help for maker skills, or helping on the facilitation side of things, which is I believe a very handy skill to have in reliability engineering if you're consulting and doing maintenance strategy workshops or root cause analysis workshops or anything like that. Having that facilitation skill often isn't taught or sort of made aware anywhere, but at least listening to Carl and picking up on some of those tips, and reading some of his articles that's posted to Ascendo Reliability as well. They've definitely come in handy through there, and listening to Chris and advancing my statistical analysis knowledge. It's always great as well. I've part of my master's research was in component life extension, so looking to extend serviceable life of components out past well past the OEM recommendations, just to maximize that total cost of ownership for the customer. So I've had to do a fair bit of statistical analysis through that, and a fair bit of failure analysis to actually work out some of the steps and things like that. So no, it was always great listening to the podcast to try and listen to the idea of what the topic was and how I could best apply it to either my workplace or my research.
Well, I know Kirk and I have talked about him and his wife blowing up blenders enough times that, but Nik, with that topic in your education, you need to come out here and talk to where I live is a small community, and we pull water from a local creek and have our own treatment plant and water distribution system. And the water plant was put in the treatment plant, the thing that actually cleans up the water for us, was put in 81, 82, something like that. and its expected life from the vendor when we got it was 25 years.
Yep.
So we're pushing 40 years now, or 45 years. And about 5-10 years ago, I think it was about 10 years ago, they noticed this great big hole in the two chambers that aren't supposed to be mixing stuff. And so they emptied it all out and they welded some plates on it. And at that time, I'm on their case going, we need a plan to replace this thing. You can only weld this stuff together so many times. And of course, now they're doing it again, and it's going to cost us almost a third of a new one to get it refurbished.
That's an expensive Band-Aid.
Yeah. Can I ask you, Fred, when they told you that it had an expected life of what, 25 years? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Did they tell you what would break first?
It would rust. The walls would thin out.
Yeah, okay.
The primary thing.
So were they correct?
The pumps and the valves and all those things are we replace as needed, right? And then we have spares of the critical ones.
Okay.
They actually are lasting pretty well. It's a multi-chamber system, and water is moving through it, and water will go through steel is like it does everything else, and so it's and then one of the chambers is full of, we call it I call it mud because that's what it looks like, but it's a carbon and a handful of other materials and a particular layer that the water percolates through, and that cleans it up really well.
Right.
But there's moving water and sharp particulate, which is never a good idea around metal. And,
right. So they had some knowledge on the degradation of the or the actual consumption of the materials or something, that they had some idea that this was going to be 25 years, and that you were going to use that wall, those the separating up. Okay.
And then you're contaminating your water as you're going. So that I'm on their case that, this patch is going to work for a while, but now they're really expensive to patch it. And now my part is, like you said, Nik, it's the education and teaching and influence and all those things that go, at some point we really need to replace it. And it's going to cost us $1 million. So we need to start planning how we're going to do that and have a backup plan. What's our contingency when this thing just settles into a pile of mushy rust and we can't clean water anymore? But it's been about 30 years of people that have been running the show that really didn't want to spend money except on duct tape.
Yep.
Well, duct tape's pretty cheap, and
you can get a ball gown out of it.
It's like my neighbor across the street. He's got cars that are 30 years old, and he's constantly working on them. And I'm wondering, does he believe that the expense of maintaining it is certainly cheaper than going out and buying a new $20,000 or even $15,000 used car or something like that? And but for me, buying a car and keeping up is a lot of technological benefits. And I don't know if that's true with water filtration systems or the many, certainly equipment.
Well, the designs of these things these designs of these systems haven't really changed in 100 years.
Right.
So there's no, you can put another meter on it,
but they're better pumps and other things. So,
just the other day, I want to get your opinion on this one, Nik, is the other day I saw an article that was talking, where was it on the news? I don't know, wherever I saw it, caught my eye. And it was, if you bought a washing machine 10 years ago, it's probably still working. If you bought a washing machine 5 years ago, it's probably not working. And then they went over all kinds of stuff, all kinds of products and systems and stuff. If you bought a car recently, you've probably had a recall on it to replace some part of the electronics on it somewhere, some part of it. I think Tesla recalled 1 million of their vehicles recently for part of their software.
Yeah, I think it was the whole fleet of Cybertrucks or something, wasn't it?
Well, that was, another issue too. Yeah, their accelerator pad would, the face of it would slip off and get under the carpet at full throttle. It's kind of a bad thing to have happen. So they replaced all of those. But if you bought I drive a 2000 Toyota small pickup truck, it just works. I have to roll the window up by hand. It has a cassette deck for the entertainment system, which I don't have any. I think it has a DVD I think it got up, or a CD player.
Oh, that's pretty new.
Yeah, that was an advance at the time. The idea though is it's 24 years old.
Yeah.
I take it to the shop and have them change oil and other fluids in it because we don't drive it a whole lot, and it needs an oil change once in a while. The total mileage on it is like 40,000 miles.
Well, that's why we have why I buy Asian cars, Kia, and Honda, and
Well, that was the
Toyota.
point. Yeah, it was the point is you buy older vehicle or older equipment, and they were making the argument of that if you buy a brand new phone with all the latest gadgets and everything on it, the chance that it'll last a long time is pretty low compared to a phone made 10 years ago. If it will still work on our networks and all the other stuff, if it still meets your need, it'll probably keep working. Is that market forces are making things faster, cheaper, all those kinds of things, and adding more features to it. And car is the perfect example where it's I heard somebody say there's like 30 or 40 small computers in a modern vehicle these days. Good grief. How many ways do you need to tell what time it is? I don't know.
But many of those
that?
are for safety, and I'm sure that's true.
Well,
And well, let's look at Nik's industry and mining equipment or things like that. I would think they would add other
GPS
safety
stuff,
feature, GPS.
GPS would then fit.
Other
What do you think,
capabilities.
Nick? You come at this in a different way than we do.
Yeah, it's obviously that complicated sort of trade-off between safety and product reliability there with it. The newer products having that higher chance of failure just comes from that complex interaction within the broader system and interconnections and things like that is sort of my thoughts on it. And we're talking before offline just about electrical connections and harnesses and things being sort of like the major cause. And the more sort of connections you sort of have within a system, you've got that higher chance of it vibrating loose or a screw not being sort of tightened correctly, and then being the cause of intermittent connections through there. Um, and then mentioning before, the other trade-off there is the market first to market on something, and getting the pushing the product out and not having the chance to do your halts or your hazards or anything like that, and really sort of stress testing the system before it sort of goes. And potentially that's the highest source of recalls coming to fruition is we're not sort of getting that lab data before we go to market. We're now using the broader public as our beta sort of testers, and waiting till it a couple of issues start to pop up, then start to iron it out with updates or upgraded components, redesigned components from there. So I think it's been a cultural shift from building something that lasts to trying to maximize profits and get something out the door as quickly as what we can. I think it's sort of that trade-off has sort of been sort of tipped in the wrong direction, and we're starting to see those increased recalls come through. That's just my thoughts on it.
Yeah, no, it's good. It also ties into, and I know we've talked about it a number of times. I think Kirk, you and I have talked about it a couple times, this right to repair. We're seeing more and more legislation in the US anyway. And I think Europe's has got a bunch of this too.
Right.
Is that if you buy a phone, you should be able to effect repairs on it. It should not have to go back to the factory, basically. I can't imagine a D5 dozer that you can't repair in the field, that you have to take it back to the dealer to get it fixed. That would not fly in the business.
It'd be a pretty catastrophic failure if you have to take it back to the dealer to fix, not be able to fix it in field. Like, they're designed to design for maintainability, sort of being pushed through that whole type of range. And in most things, in mining, it's the remote locations as well sort of stems to it, then the transport costs of getting whatever it has failed back to a workshop, at least in Australia anyway. If we're looking up in Western Australia, up in the Pilbara, you then have to transport it to the coast to get it repaired, and you could be looking at a 12-hour transportation time,
Right.
before you even, and that's that equates to that extra downtime that the machine's not operating and lost profits and things like that. So
it varies by industry. I think the article is really crashing on the not consumables, the phones and gadgets and TVs and
Well,
toasters and stuff like that.
actually, Fred, in Colorado, they did enact a law, and the legislature passed a law about the right to repair for.
Mhm.
Here in Colorado, we have a ton of farm equipment, heavy grain.
Oh, it's like the John Deere guys.
John Deere, right? And,
yeah.
not so much Caterpillar, but John Deere and the other farm equipment manufacturers made it very difficult for the farmers themselves to replace or repair their own equipment. And so the legislature acted on that and passed a law that said all this particular kind of equipment that you can be able to replace it and repair it without sending it to or having an authorized dealer, and that the companies are required to sell you some of the parts and maintenance, which wasn't before. So, but I find it funny that the right to repair has been extended sometimes to the iPhone and other things that I'm sorry, I'm an experienced technician or engineer that has taken apart and punched his equipment, but I certainly wouldn't attempt to try and, I need a new battery in my iPhone, but I'm not going to pay, save $25 and buy their kit with the chance of
permanently destroying your
permanently versus having somebody that's very experienced and has done it maybe hundreds of times do it very quickly, in a shop. And so I that's a trade-off. But how much does your industries that you work with and talk to, do they get and use the feedback from you or their customers about their equipment reliability?
Yeah, so my experience when I was working with the mining OEM and construction OEM as such, we would feed any field data that we were experiencing locally back into the factory, and you'd start to, if enough incidences were raised, you'd start to see interest from the factory and the design team in trying to redesign some of that stuff. But you had to meet their internal thresholds for for things to be looked at. If it was a unique case, for example, unique to one region or to one mine site or anything like that, it would be left up to us to explore a potential option locally, and then obviously feed that information back through as well, or part of that reliability loop for the system. But yeah, it was pretty positive on that front. But you would have to deal with us being the OEM team directly there. If you went to a third party to get the repairs done or did the repairs yourselves, if the mine site did the repair themselves, we sort of would work with them. But if they went to a third party, it would be like, oh well, you haven't invested the money in us to then invest the time for the R&D to occur, so it would sort of be left by the wayside. And you'd sort of in my role, understanding the importance of sort of collecting some of these data points for failure analysis and things like that, and looking at broader and life data analysis or anything like that, I'd be interested in some of those points. But the factory itself probably wouldn't be as much.
Yeah, they'd probably censor that piece of equipment and say, well, it's not ours anymore.
Yep.
Unfortunately, they might learn something too. There might be some really
and that goes back to that skill set issue that Kirk was talking about just then, about his he could repair his phone, but for the extra $25, he might as well get it repaired by someone who does it day in, day out.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
But there's also an amazing amount of pressure to get the equipment running again, or get the factory running again, or whatever. Is all kinds of pressures on what we do, and it's one of the things that fascinates me about reliability is that we're often solving very similar problems. Why is it failing? What can we do about it? Or what will fail and how can we prevent it? Similar type of activities we would do. Wherever we are in the world and wherever we are in the industries, there's different forces or pressures or constraints and all of those, but it's, for whatever reason, it's allowed us to have plenty of discussions. It's still hard for me to believe this, Kirk. We've been doing this for, a handful of folks co-hosting with us in various discussions, and schedule conflicts and broken gear and lost recordings and everything else they've gone through.
Well, we always have new information from the field and people. I'm always scouring for articles and seeing, reliability problems, but we always come up with something new, even though we've talked for 8 years now over this. And I say, haven't we talked about that?
Probably
7 years ago or something. But it's worth repeating. And sometimes I know you may feel yourself, Nik, repeating the same thing. And eventually they'll hear it. You tell them what you're going to tell them. You tell them what you want to tell them,
and then you tell them again. Yeah.
You have to just keep repeating it, and it's unfortunate.
No, that's it. Then over the years, you start to get good at refining your message you're trying to put through, and then trying to convince them it was their idea to start off with. And
that's it. Convince them it's their idea.
That's a great idea. I've given up though, Kirk, trying to get you interested in statistics. But
I know
it's a different battle.
I'm just a real hands-on, visual guy. So, but how long have you been trying to get rid of MTBF, Fred? I mean, you've been doing this. When did you start the No MTBF?
It was an applied reliability symposium in San Diego.
2000.
Oh, it was early 2000s. So I've been at it 20 years.
It's 2024.
Yeah, I know. It's been 20 plus years or thereabouts. It's probably in that ballpark. Maybe 18 years. And it started because I'm getting ready I had a 45-minute slot to present, and I'm getting introduced, and somebody tapped me on the shoulder and says, "Hey, I got a quick question. How do you convince people that the way they're using MTBF isn't any good?" Or it was something like that. And so I got on the stage and I got introduced, and there's 150 reliability engineers or people care about reliability at this conference. And I said, "How many of you have had problems with this? Somebody not understanding what it is or what it means or misinterpreting it or whatever." Every single person raised their hand, as far as I could tell. It was and I said, "All right, the hell with the presentation." So I got a whiteboard or some chalkboard or a piece of paper or whatever it was, and said, "So what ways have you seen it go bad?" And we filled up the paper, and then people started sharing stories of how bad it could be and stuff like that. And so it kind of really dawned on me that this is not an isolated problem. It wasn't just my pet peeve. We face it as an industry. So I thought, well, I'll talk about it. And the No MTBF site is, I've handed out thousands of buttons. I've had, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of people visit the No MTBF site. And I'm re-releasing a lot of the articles now through Ascendo. And they're getting a lot of traction on LinkedIn and on the site. So I'm really encouraged at the reception that those articles are getting and the message is getting. But that's just one of many topics that we talk about on the show, and they all help us from having the ability to influence and present well and those kinds of things, to doing good data analysis, to doing good failure analysis. We've got a pretty broad range of skills that we need to master. So hopefully the show is helped people in one way or the other to think about what we do in a little bit different way, or at least know that you're not alone. I guess that's one of our real hopes of the show.
Yeah.
So one last note for you, Nik. I hate to put you on the spot because there's like 2 of the 6 hosts on the show next to you here. Do you have a favorite participant in the show?
And I won't be hurt. Fred is all you could say. Fred, and then you win them all.
Well, that's it. Now, Fred's always asking the key cutting questions there. As for a favorite, as I mentioned before, it all just depends on what I'm sort of looking for. And it's been great over the years to sort of listen to each one of the hosts and start to understand what their area of expertise sort of is. And yeah, if I'm if I'm looking for something failure related, it's always great to hear about Kirk. And if I'm looking for something statistical, Chris. And if I'm looking for something Famika related, or to a lesser extent RCM, I'd listen to something with Carl in it. But yeah, that's, I don't really have a favorite presenter, I suppose. It's just it's always great there.
You're a politician, not a consultant.
I'll definitely sit on the
Wow.
fence on this one.
All right, no worries. Kirk, do you got a favorite? You've listened to a bunch of shows. Not me, other than me, because I know most of them.
No, I like Chris, and I like Carl. I like all of them. You know, we, as Nik has talked about, maybe we all have a little different frame of reference that we come from. I come from being a field service engineer and working on it, never taking a CRE course, never looking at, you know, those models that are Arrhenius or the erroneous equation that everybody still is alive today, and Mill Handbook 215 and all this, you know, just waste of time to me, doesn't give you much. Yeah. But Greg Hobbs was trying to teach this since 1987, the method of limit testing, although he used a bad acronym. Yeah. But he did first push the limit testing idea, and it's kind of gained traction, but like MTBF, it's still very to some people very controversial. Yeah, no, I've run into that too. So, well, anyway, I think we kind of blew past our 20-minute thought that we would have on the show. So Nik, thanks so much for joining us on our 1000th episode and your insights and view. And I'm glad you were able to connect across the world like this. Somehow all this equipment stayed reliable enough for this hour. All the way from Australia to here, you know, it's amazing. But one of the biggest joys, and I mentioned this earlier, is the questions we get. And thank you, Nik, personally, for participating and also providing questions and ideas over the years. We really do appreciate that. And if you're listening to this, you know, we've got another 1,000 episodes to go. And as you can tell, we don't have a plan for what we're going to talk about. We'll figure something out. Yet it's when I start an episode and say, hey, Kirk, we got this question we need to talk about. And it usually is a really good show then. I enjoy the discussion immensely. And so send them in. You know, if we get another 1,000 questions, we'll be set for the next, 8 years or 10 years or however long it takes us to do that. So head over to accendoreliability.com/go/SOR. There's a couple of ways you can get in touch with us. Most people get in touch with us through LinkedIn. Kirk and I, and I imagine, Nik, you're on LinkedIn.
Yeah, sure.
Is you can find everybody. And if you got a question for one or all of us, let us know and we'll try to get an answer to you, and we'll get probably make it into a discussion for the show and kind of hash it out a little more deeply. Also, you can send us email directly through our about pages on the Sendo. So there's plenty of ways for you to get in touch. So one last time, thanks so much for joining us, Nik. I really enjoyed it. And your insights and ideas and thoughts, I really, really appreciate it. And thanks, Nik. Thanks, Nik. And
thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on. It's been a blast, and definitely humbled to be on the 1000th episode.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, me too.
So here's to the next 1,000. All right. We'll go with that. All right. Thanks so much, you guys. We'll talk to you all later. Cheers.
See you all.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to Speaking of Reliability. We invite you to join the conversation. If you have a question or a topic that you think we should discuss in a future show, please let us know. You can find a comment box below the episode show notes, or just leave a note as part of a review on iTunes.